Good evening to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us on this Good Friday. Simon, I'd like to start with you. We've seen this hour some startling images, drone footage of mass graves, coffins stacked up in a pit because there have been so many deaths in New York. Tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'd been hearing for a week now suggestions and rumours that the city of New York was considering mass burials. Initially, those had been denied and sort of batted away by the authorities in New York, but they conceded a few days ago that undertakers and mortuaries are simply overwhelmed with the numbers of dead that are emerging from some of the hospitals at the epicentre of the battle against coronavirus. And bear in mind now that New York isn't just leading the country in terms of coronavirus cases, it is leading the world in terms of coronavirus cases, and it's only one state in the United States. So these absolutely shocking images that really go right to the heart of the American psyche, showing plain wood coffins being stacked up on top of one another, buried in a trench that has been dug on Hart Island, which is in the Bronx, just off the island of Manhattan in New York City. And really, I think these are images that sear many Americans. This was a country 4 or 5 weeks ago that felt absolutely invincible, a country whose Secretary of State was signing his Twitter messages with the hashtag swagger. And now it's a country where we see images of hospital workers turning up to battle COVID-19 clothed in bin liners, and a country where the dead are being put into temporary mass grave sites in the Bronx. I mean, that is just a stunning series of developments over a 4 or 5 week period.
Yes, indeed. Am I correct, Simon, that it is now 9,000 deaths in the United States in total?
The total deaths for the United States, Sal, are over 16,500. At least a third of those deaths are in New York State itself. So New York State, the epicenter nationally for coronavirus, but there are other hotspots out there that they're worried about. New Orleans, Detroit, Los Angeles, of course, San Francisco, Dallas. It's all happening at that kind of level in big, dense, urban environments, because the population density in those environments makes it so easily transmissible.
And to you, Olly Barratt in London, am I correct, because these figures are so hard to keep track of and they just keep ticking up hour by hour, that in the United Kingdom we're looking at a death toll of around 8,000?
That's right, because we've had just under 1,000 deaths in the previous 24-hour period that's been recorded. That is a grim number for the United Kingdom. If there is any solace to be found in the fatalities data, is that it is not hugely jumping on a day-by-day basis now, and that reflects some of the other data that we're seeing in the UK, which is beginning to show signs of a flattening in terms of curves. When you look at hospital admissions, critical care bed admissions in the National Health Service as well, the deaths are lagging data. So those will be the last things that we start to see fall in the United Kingdom. But certainly officials here are seeing what they describe as green shoots when they look at the fatalities numbers and the other data as well. We are not seeing that rapid acceleration anymore, but that doesn't take away at all from how depressing these numbers are in totality.
Yes, indeed. And now a question for both of you. Simon, you in Washington, and Olly, you in London. I'll start with you, Olly. We in South Africa have just been told last night by our president that we're going to have a further 2 weeks of lockdown. Now, you're both operating under different kinds of lockdowns, 2 hours. But, Olly, what is the latest on how long the lockdown's going to last where you are?
Well, our lockdown is supposed to be reviewed on Monday. That will be the first 3-week period, after which Boris Johnson, when he first announced it, said that there would be a review. Well, it is very clear that the government is not suddenly going to lift lockdown restrictions on Monday. Right now, though, they're not giving us a huge amount of detail about exactly how they're reviewing this, what kind of easing of a lockdown may take place at what time, at what point in the future. And the reason for that is that officials believe that this weekend weekend is absolutely critical. That the data shows that British people have, by and large, been following the social distancing guidelines, and what they don't want to do is give people a false sense of security over this very warm and sunny Easter weekend in the United Kingdom. They don't want people to think that the lockdown's just about to end, they can head out and have picnics in the park and that manner of thing. And so they are trying to stall any discussion about easing of the lockdown. So what will happen next week is we think it'll be extended past Monday, indefinitely really, and then towards the end of next week, if the data merits it, if the data shows that Britain's curves are heading in the right direction, we might start to get some more detail from the government about when and how the lockdown will be eased.
And Simon, in the United States, we know that not all areas are locked down, though many states are. What is the sort of lockdown outlook?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the problem here in the United States. There is no national lockdown. President Trump has refused to introduce one, despite the urgings of the public health officials who sit on his own coronavirus task force. So it falls to each individual state to decide what to do. We just heard here in Washington, D.C., that just north of us in Maryland, starting on Monday, you won't be allowed to go into a supermarket or a grocery store without a face mask. That's not the case in vast stretches of the rest of the United States. President Trump's Surgeon General said on television here a few hours ago that he doesn't believe that the country in any meaningful way will be able to reopen before the end of May, early June at the outside. But all of this, of course, is not really now going to fall to President Donald Trump. He can come into the White House briefing room and declare the country open for business. But he's the man who said it was up to the individual 50 governors all over the country to decide how to deal with coronavirus. They will also now have to decide how to deal with a relaxation of the lockdown.
Interesting how you mentioned face masks. Our health minister has just this afternoon said he's really recommending that absolutely everyone wears them, but that we don't use the surgical mask, that we make our own if we have to. This is a special weekend across the world. It is a holy weekend, whether you're observing Pesach, Passover, or Good Friday and the Easter weekend. I'm just wondering how differently things are being done. And I'll start with you, Simon. I mean, are people having Easter egg hunts through Zoom meetups? Is it a very different sort of holiday weekend?
Yeah, absolutely. Virtual Easter egg hunts are going on in many parts of the country, and clearly with restaurants closed, there's no possibility for people to go out for a lunch on Easter Sunday. Churches are doing what synagogues did during Passover earlier in the week. They are relaying services online with very, very small numbers of people present in the actual place of worship. But there's a problem even with that now in the United States, because across the South, in many parts of the country where elected leaders acted very late to introduce lockdowns, some of the mega churches are insisting that they are absolutely going to go ahead with full-scale Easter services. Some churches in Louisiana and Texas saying their doors will be open this weekend, and they expect 2,000 people to fill the pews of those mega churches. And public health officials, of course, argue that would be a disaster, because that then becomes a petri dish for the spread of coronavirus. We're going to hear from President Trump about all of this a little bit later on here today. He's taking an Easter blessing at the White House today, and then he will be talking to the public for his daily briefing.
And Olly, in London, I know the one thing that the Brits have been asked to do is not go outside, enjoy the sunshine. When sunshine does come out in England, it's normally great cause for celebration. But is Easter, Passover, being observed in a very different way in the United Kingdom as well?
It certainly is. We don't have the kind of mega churches they have that Simon was talking about in the United States, really here in the United Kingdom. And certainly we are not seeing people congregating in churches. We won't see them heading to services over the weekend. There will be a lot of online activity happening, as Simon was mentioning, in the United States. When it comes to outside, people are allowed out for one period of exercise per day. What they're not allowed to do is hang around in a park or sunbathe or sit on a park bench or use the playgrounds. And so the police are out and about enforcing these rules. But it's difficult for the police as well. These are unprecedented situations. We have emergency legislation in place that does mean the police can enforce the social distancing guidelines the government has put down.